Thank you, Meg, and it's a pleasure to meet you once again. Love the hair.
Thank you.
I am happy with my hair the way it is, but I'm experiencing some hair envy right now.
Oh, if you've ever thought about going vibrant, do it. Reach out to me on Instagram. I will give you the full regimen because I started 5 years ago and never looked back. It's
I'm
fabulous.
thinking maybe the color of this dress. What do you think?
Yes. Oh my God. Oh, green hair is a passion of mine. Like I'm so jealous of girlies that can pull off green by their face. So, oh,
We'll talk. We'll talk.
all right.
um,
Now, Leanna's amazing. I want Leanna, I want you to be able to give your background and history for people. What should they know about you as we step into this subject?
yeah, so I wanted to start with something I recently learned about called an I am statement. I learned this from my amazing DEAI task force co-chair, Gabby Gonzalez. And I just thought it was such a great way to introduce myself, to give you an understanding of my perspective, where I'm coming from, and kind of set the tone for the kind of openness that I hope to show in this session. So, hi all, I'm Leanna Lee. I'm a Caucasian woman with no preferred pronouns, but I do go by she, her for this event. I have curly dark blonde hair, pale skin, and hazel eyes, and I'm wearing dark green glasses, a dark green dress, and a gray sweater. I'm a full-time worker with a work accommodation plan, as well as a freelance business owner. I am disabled, ill, neurodivergent, and I sometimes use a mobility aid. I have anxiety, PTSD, CPTSD, dysthymia with major depression, also known as double depression, and chronic fatigue. I'm the victim of violent sexual assault and have a history of childhood abuse with an ACE score of 6. And I just want to end with this with a health disclaimer. I'm about 8 out of 10 on my fatigue scale today, so I'm pretty tired. So if I slur my words, if I have trouble, I can feel it now, kind of like eating marbles, or you notice me shaking, which I am a bit, or I lose track of what I'm saying, that is the chronic fatigue and anxiety and depression getting to me today. So just wanted to let you all know that, but I'm doing fine. So wanted to give that quick introduction.
First off, thank you for level setting. I absolutely appreciate and love, love, love the visual call out. I always forget to do this, so thank you for that. And as well as, thank you for sharing all of this with people. I know it is really wonderful when people are able to share, these parts of themselves, but it's never mandatory. So we are very grateful that you feel comfortable sharing this with us today. So thank you. All right, now we're going to dive into some questions that I wanted to ask Leanna. But as we go, we really want to make sure that you all have the power to drive today's conversation if you'd like. So if you have questions, please feel free to submit them. You can put them into the group chat. It's on the right-hand side of the screen in front of you. And there will be PowerToFly people hanging out in there to get your questions to us. So if you got them, ask early, ask often. That's the best way to get your question answered today. All right, Leanna, let's start kind of with some base level. What are some of the common issues that you have run into when you've been advocating for disabled people through DEAI? So diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion.
The biggest one that comes to mind is just a lack of awareness and understanding of how massive the disabled community is, not just in the States, but also worldwide. As far as I'm aware, we're the largest minority in the world. We come in at about, I think, 1.3 billion, so about 16% of the world's population. And I think about 25% of the US adult population. So it's a pretty massive group. I also think it's a bit of an issue understanding what disability actually means. So ADA defines disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And that is vague for a reason. ADA, as I'm sure you all know, they're the institution involved with accommodations for disabled persons. And I really appreciate that definition, because although a majority of my disabilities fall into that mental impairment, I think it's so helpful to have both. And the mental impairment, I believe, was a pretty recent addition. So kudos to them for finally bringing that forward. Another common issue, I think, is addressing intersectionality in the disabled community. Again, we are such a huge group. uh, there is intersectionality everywhere you look. I mean, across race, across gender, across sexual orientation, levels of education, income. Even within the disabled community, you've got, again, so broad, so diverse. You've got physical disabilities, you've got mental health disabilities, you have chronic illnesses, you have neurodivergence. And many, some people who are neurodivergent will not identify as disabled. Some people who are chronically ill will not identify as disabled or neurodivergent. So there's just so much nuance there that I think is hard to tackle in DEAI, but it is essential to understand just the insanely broad nature of the community. I identify as disabled, chronically ill, and neurodivergent, but I'm also white, educated, straight American. So I have a lot of advantages that many other people don't. And so I think that we, much like many other aspects and many other protected groups under DEAI, I think we tend to dismiss people who on the surface look like they have everything together, or think that, oh, well, they're over there suffering in their own way, dealing with life in their own way. They're not here, they're not in front of us, they're not part of our day-to-day lives. We don't really have to think about it. So I think that's been an issue I've come across. And then finally, which kind of plays into that last one, is recognizing that the systems we are used to and the world is built on are not built for disabled people. Everything from public transport to 9-to-5 jobs in person, to remote work tools, that they are getting better, to virtual and real life events. We've made great strides in some of those in the past 10, 20 years, but for the most part, this is still not the case. And it probably never will be the case, let's be honest here, but being able to recognize that everything that we know to be true and to be standard is built on by and for abled people. So I think that is, I consider that an issue because that is the basis on which people come to learn about the disabled community. And it is very difficult to change that because this is what you're brought up on. In the same way that if you come from a racist or homophobic family with maybe a more conservative background, it is difficult to kind of reprogram your thinking. So I think that is an issue that I notice. I could keep going. The last thing I'll say on that is I think we still tokenize disabled, ill, and neurodiverse people quite a lot. Especially in the workplace. I have there's a Harvard Business Review article that I really dislike that I would love to share a link to if anyone is interested. I can share that in the chat if
Yes,
that's
please.
at all. But it so encapsulates to me what the tokenization of disabled people in the workplace. It's called Disability as a Source of Competitive Advantage. And the title just makes me cringe.
Oh, I can't wait to read that later. Like
I'm
gonna go sit in the backyard and like just grumble to myself as I scroll through my phone. No, truly. I mean, you make like, oh gosh, like 80 incredibly valid points in the last 2 minutes alone, right? Like it's a massive tent. There is a huge, not necessarily issue, but there is a lot at play when it comes to that identity aspect of it. I live with bipolar disorder, highly recurrent major depressive disorder, as well as ADHD. And while, yeah, I am hella mentally ill, I also really don't like that phrase. I really don't like referring to myself as disabled or in any way like not able to do things other people can. So that's all on me. That's all like the mess that's going on up here before I even get out into wanting, wanting or even thinking that I deserve accommodations for things, right? Like there's a huge learning curve there that a lot of people are on, whether or not they grew up abled or not. Like there is a massive mental and like kind of societal shift that kind of has to happen there to make people understand that like you think you're doing something for everyone, but your default is not what represents most people. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
All right. What impact do you think people who are disabled or neurodivergent, what do you think those populations impact they have on DEAI?
Well, so disabled and neurodiverse, this really, really diverse population was really only added to the DEI story within the last couple of years, right? Very, very new to it. And the upside to that is we've developed our own movements because we weren't really part of larger movements. We developed our own over the past 20, 30, 50 years. If you look at kind of the trajectory of ADA legislation, right? But now that we are more involved in DAI, being recognized more in DAI, I think the thing I notice most is if you think about the foundations of DEAI, very much a racial foundation, which very, very necessary in this country. But I think a lot of people have associated DEI only with race. And that means things like tokenization when it comes to diversity hires is a big problem. One thing that disabled and neurodiverse people really do for DEI is they bring that intersectionality. We are clear indication that you can live with so many multiple identities and have unique individual needs, and also struggle to participate in society as we know it, because society is not built for us, but also have so much to contribute. So we are kind of the redheaded stepchild almost of DEI, because we're just coming in with all these ideas and identities. And I think we have the opportunity kind of as a group, not that we should be putting in all the work, but I think adding us as a population to that conversation really opens up inclusion and equity in ways that benefit everyone. Because if you think about it, remote work, for example, becomes a lot more accessible and accepted and open in the past few years. It opens doors not only for disabled people. I remember having so many conversations with other disabled folks during COVID where they're like, wow, I can actually participate in work calls, I can find jobs. And there were a lot of downsides, of course, to lockdown and to COVID. But in terms of communication and the workplace, we actually saw some benefits with the remote work movement.
And things that makes me so excited, because like benefits to smaller groups have ripple effects, right? They benefit other people, not just within those groups.
Exactly. And so parents, caregivers, students, even if you think about the tools that a lot of disabled people request or need to participate in things like transcripts, captioning, audiovisual resources, these benefit people with temporary disabilities, say those who've been injured, who have been through surgery, older folks, people with different learning styles, people who may struggle but either haven't been diagnosed or prefer not to identify as disabled and therefore are not likely to request accommodations. It just, as you said, the ripple effect is large.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we talked about this and you mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of this when you were talking about where you are on your kind of spoon scale or pain scale. How do you set and maintain personal boundaries as an act of self-advocacy? I'm hideous at this. So like I was listening like crazy while you were doing yours, thinking like, okay, I have to remember to take stock of these things for myself.
Yeah.
So how do you do this for yourself? What does that look like, or what does that feel like for you?
Sorry, my brain just stopped working. Self-advocacy, yes. So the I am statement is, and the health disclaimer, I have found to be helpful because it not only reminds me of where I'm at, but I think it helps set a precedent, excuse me, for how I'm going to act, in a formal professional setting, but also hopefully encourages other people to mention if they're struggling as well. If one person says it, maybe more will. It's not always the case, but I think that's been helpful, and it is almost a boundary because I'm saying this far and no further. This is what I can bring. This is what I can give you. And sometimes I have to do that. If you think about, I'm juggling freelance and full-time identities, and they clash. They clash. Sometimes I have schedule conflicts. Sometimes I'm too tired to get my freelance work done. Sometimes I'm too tired to get my full-time work done, and I have to set those boundaries in both cases. So I'd say another big one was getting a work accommodation plan. Obviously not an opportunity or option for everybody, but it was terrifying. I will tell you that. I was the only and am the only openly identified disabled person on my team, possibly in my company, actually, at least as far as I'm aware, on the US side of the company. So that was quite a learning experience. I'd also never done this before. I was a lifer freelancer. I'm currently in my first full-time job. And so I had to learn everything from scratch, the whole process. I had to work with my manager, with multiple managers, actually, with HR. And it was an interesting learning experience, but it was very helpful because I was able to go back to my therapist, to talk about what I needed, to talk about how I could work best. It really forced me to think through all these things very carefully and to structure a plan that would not only benefit me, but one of the requirements of the plan was it had to be replicable for other workers, which I thought was interesting. So I also tried to be aware of that as well, that if it came up again, maybe someone else could take advantage of this. So I think part of the active self-advocacy is trying to leave behind something better than you found it. I
There
don't
it
know
is.
if you were going to say that, actually.
No, I was literally going to follow that with, and if it benefits someone else, I am much more likely to take it more seriously because I can muddle through on garbage. I'll be fine. It's okay. But for other people, we got to do better, right? Like that's where my mental, that's where my mental health is. So I love, love, love the idea that like, you put in work on the front end, right? Now, granted, this is unpaid. This is a lot of work that is it's hard, it's a mental load, it's a whole kind of stuff that you have to be prepared to say or to try and figure out for yourself because no one's really going to know better than you. And so there is that aspect of it, but I also absolutely love that making it replicable was part of the assignment because you're right. When we're doing these things, it is hard as hell to blaze a trail sometimes, right? But knowing that someone is coming behind you or hoping that someone will makes it, at least for me, a little bit easier to blaze that trail, knowing I'm not spending all of this time, whacking with my metaphorical machete at all of this mess, and then it's just going to grow up behind me 2 weeks later.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that was not my idea. That was a requirement. So not taking any credit for that, but I think it turned out to be a really good exercise and an important exercise, I think, for me. And something I hope to write about once I have the time and energy to do that. But yeah, I guess a couple other ways I maintain boundaries are I like to set a limit on meetings I take a day, usually just for myself. I'll just be mindful because generally you can't tell your employer, oh, I'm only going to take one meeting today, but just being mindful for myself of my workload, being mindful of breaks. I tend to be very low energy right now, between late morning and mid-afternoon. So just being aware of when I need to eat, when I need to rest. And another one that's been helpful that wasn't necessarily part of the work accommodation plan that I have found helpful is setting expectations. I've had a couple managers in my time at this company, and being able to set communication expectations with each of them has been so helpful. Sort of, what do you need from me? What can I give you that will make me look competent as a worker and not make me feel like I'm falling behind as a disabled worker? I think having that, being able to take a little bit of that power back almost in a way, is very helpful because I think we feel so underrepresented and are so underappreciated in the workplace. It's easy to let ourselves get left behind. And so that's something I try to do. And I'm outspoken and I'm not very tactful. So I find setting communication
My kind of people.
also helps me approach things more professionally and not just, cuss people out that I shouldn't really. And sets me up for a healthier career track. We'll put it that
Yeah.
way.
Well, and when you think about it, like even if you just boil it down to like you said earlier, right? Not every person is resourced enough or in a resourced or supplyable enough situation to be able to make these requests or to have these requests honored by their company. There's a whole bunch of stuff at play here, obviously. But I think what you're talking about is really important, not just for the company, but like you said, also for yourself, right? What you're talking about of like kind of taking stock of like, how am I doing today? How's my social battery? How's my brain battery? Am I actually functioning on all 6 cylinders, or are we like in like a 4-2 scenario right now? And I used to take stock of that a lot right after I got diagnosed because I was trying to, get a handle on my cycling or whatever. And I definitely let that go, especially in the last, like, I would say 1.5 to 2 years. And as you're talking about this, I'm thinking like, oh yeah, that would be way better because it's way more like, yes, it's personal, it's for you, but it's also proactive, right? You're showing, hey, I am considering these things. Here's what I know about myself. And here's what I think I need. Here's some suggestions I have. And so like being proactive doesn't just show that you need this assistance. It also shows that like you care about this is something that is important to you, and you're not just coming with a question or with problems. You're like, hey, here's an issue, but also maybe here's how we solve parts of this issue. So
Yeah,
I
I
very
think
much like
that
that.
self-knowledge is so important. I will say, I mean, obviously this caveat that I've been dealing with my conditions for very long times. It's taken me years to even reach a basic understanding of myself and how they work. And certain conditions are so hard to predict. Like, I don't know which type of bipolar you have, but oh, two. Okay, so that might be slightly more predictable than one.
A little bit.
A
I
little
get less.
bit.
Well, my husband's also bipolar type 1. So how we went
Oh,
undiagnosed
yeah.
until like 2 years ago and did not murder each other, I don't know.
Mhm.
But yes, but with two, I have my swings tend to be a little bit less extreme and
Right.
a little bit longer as opposed to like up and down, up and down, up and down.
Mhm.
But again, that widely varies based on mental health, diet, sleep, how I'm doing with my meds, all kinds of stuff. But yes, you're right. Like it is a little more predictable, but it does give me a little bit of a guideline, right? I can go and look at like what other people are having happen to them and say like, okay, is this reflective of my experience? Oh yeah, that is right. I do go through this every like 7 to 9 weeks or whatever.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
yeah, that self-knowledge, you're right. It's crucial, but it's something that it takes time.
hard one. It's hard.
Yes. Ugh, crawling and scrabbling all the way, right? Okay, as a disabled person working within DEAI, it seems kind of like hand in glove, pardon the ableism there as well. However, are there challenges for you as a disabled person working within the DEAI space?
Yes, obviously. But I think, yeah, so the first one that comes to mind kind of from the from sort of me to outside to externally rather, I think it is a limited energy and ability to communicate what works best for me, and educate people that I work with what I need and what I'm looking for. And then in my sort of position in DEAI as a task force co-chair, I will try to kind of say, this is where I'm at, this is how I'm feeling today. We do check-ins at each of our committee meetings, but it's still, I still have to do the work of, okay, how am I feeling? How am I going to communicate this? Where are my limits? How do I set the boundaries? So it's still extra work, and it's always extra work to be disabled. That's just how it goes. um so I think I also have to be juggle that with being mindful that I can only ever represent my own experience. So I can't just say, oh, disabled people feel like this, because how could I possibly know how someone who uses a wheelchair feels? I don't. I have a cane that I use on days that my fatigue is really bad, but I could not possibly fully relate to that experience. So just being aware that I can't speak for everyone, that sometimes I can't speak at all, literally. And that trying to balance that potential burnout of being passionate about something, really wanting to help with change, but at a certain point being unable to. I remember I went to Johnson and Johnson's Healthy Voices conference last year as a patient advocate, which is amazing, transformative experience. But all these patient advocates were doing insanely cool things. They had nonprofits, they had businesses, they were running multiple charities, they were going on walks and runs and all of this stuff, and podcasts and blogs and everything. And all I could think of was, how do you do it? I
Oh,
don't
the number of times I have that thought,
I
like,
don't have a life-threatening chronic illness. I'm just tired a lot with all the other mental health stuff, right? That's its own thing. But I don't have a lot of physical symptoms. These are people, I was a small contingent of kind of the mental health, representation, I guess. But I was like, what? How the fuck? How the whatever? Sorry, I don't
I
know if
know.
it's
No, sure, you're good. I can't, but you can.
okay,
Um,
cool. Then
no,
how
no,
the
I'm
fuck
right
are
there with
people
you.
doing
Yeah.
this? How do you have how do you balance the advocacy with your health? How do you do when you
Especially when we come from a culture that's like, well, you have the same amount of hours in a day as Beyonce and Marie Curie. So why aren't you out, curing polio or being the world's biggest singing sensation? Like it's a very strong narrative, and it's very hard, at least America centric. It's hard to kind of get past that. Well, if you can't do everything, why aren't you not giving everything in the pursuit of everything?
Mhm.
And I don't know if this is hard for you. It's definitely hard for me. I get very passionate about this work, about the work that I get to do through PowerToFly. And so it makes it very hard for me to say, no, actually, maybe that's enough answering emails for tonight. It is 11:45. We should probably go to bed. But that's the thing, is like, it is very difficult to try and hold that line. It's like we talked about earlier with the boundary setting, where it's like, I want to be doing everything I can. I already feel like I'm not pulling my weight, which is not true. But, again, all up here, things we work on. But it really is, it can be a struggle to make sure that not only are you setting those boundaries for others to respect, but that you are respecting your own boundaries. Like,
Mm.
that's hard, that's difficult. And I don't think it's something that goes away whether or not you're passionate about what you're doing. I think it's kind of, for me at least, it's one of those things that's always there, regardless of how incensed I am about, the topic at hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. Thank you for that, Meg.
Thank you. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. I want to make sure that you get to talk more. How do you think we can make DEAI initiatives and programming more inclusive and more accessible to disabled workers?
Well, again, I think it's a lot about education. We talked about disability definitions. We talked about we didn't really discuss preferred language, but that's a big deal, and I'm sure that's coming up today many, many times. But I think of well, you and I, or not you and I, but you and I touched on this really, really slightly. But also, I was listening in on the PTSD um, session earlier, and Sydney, oh gosh, I'm going to forget her name, but Sydney, I remember the first name, brought up victim versus survivor when it comes to PTSD. And that is such an individual choice. I think impacted people is another term that's kind of been floating around, which I don't like at all, but that's just me. I used to have a huge problem with victim. I really identified strongly with survivor because it made me feel strong, especially post incident, post assault.
Yeah.
Today I identify with victim because I like putting the blame squarely where it should be. But that's an individual choice. I think survivor is a great word too. I just no longer identify with it. But things like that, these nuanced, kind of almost loaded words, loaded with context and meaning for individuals, is something you have to be very careful where you're approaching. And that's true of people versus identity first language as well, whether you refer to them as people with disabilities or disabled people. I think the general rule of thumb these days is, if you are not disabled, stick to people with disabilities. And if you are, you sort of choose what you prefer. Again, I prefer identity first language. So I like to put it front and center. But I know plenty of disabled people who don't. They don't like the term. I think you mentioned you don't like the term disabled.
I don't like it applied to
maybe you just
myself, but
don't.
it's
Yeah,
semantics. You know what I mean?
exactly.
It's not because I don't think it's true. It's because I don't like how it tastes coming out of my mouth. It has like a cilantro flavor that I don't really like.
That's a great way of putting it. I like that.
You
Cilantro,
know, but
yes.
I completely understand where you're coming
There'll
from
be
on that, where it's like
consistency.
these are terms that can, if you're not within the demographic, it can be very confusing as to why there is such confusion or why there is such strife about it. But what if you are part of the group, it is very understandable why a lot of these terms can feel so loaded or can feel very important to people, because it's like you said, it's the identity, it's how they are identifying or how they are connecting with and relating to what has happened to them in their lives. And it is very nuanced. All right, I ran us to the end of time. I'm sorry, I'm usually way better about this, but I'm just having so much fun talking to you. Leanna, before we leave today, what do you want people to remember about DEAI accessibility? What do you want them to take from today's talk?
Oh, such a great question. What I would love people to take away is that we are a huge, huge group of very, very diverse people, and including us in DEI conversations, both literally in terms of bringing us in and bringing our voices in, but also in terms of maybe bringing in third-party experts. So you're not draining the disabled people in your workplace and in your life to advocate, makes such a huge difference, not only to other protected classes, but people who we don't necessarily consider marginalized, like the parents, like the caregivers, like some older folks, regardless of their background. Also, I would say another takeaway is just listen and ask. Maybe don't overwhelm with questions. Maybe don't ask, what do you need us to do? But maybe ask, how are you doing? What do you need today? What's new with you? Maybe it's just making a new connection. And I think that is such a huge part of DEAI. And that's really what we want. We want to make connections, we want to include, and we want to have an equitable experience for everyone.
I love that so much. Leanna, thank you so, so much. I've really enjoyed spending time with you. I very much hope we get to do this again soon.
Yes, let's
But
connect.
thank you again for spending time with us, for sharing your story and your experience. We very, very much appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Meg.
Of course. Hunter, I am going to turn the floor back over to you.